This is 20 minutes of Torah, which will happen every other Shabbat morning at 10 a.m. for Parashat Bo. Forgive me, I have a cold. I'll do the best I can. I'm Rabbi Hazan Miriam Wolfson, right now in Delray Beach, Florida. And this is Sha'arei Simcha, Gates of Joy. This is a song, come from the west to you, comes from the west, comes from the slowly setting sun. This is a song with a request to you, to see how very short these endless days will come. And when they're gone, and when the dark descends, would you give anything for one more hour of light? And I suggest to you, and I suggest this is the best part of your life. These words, this song is the last verse of Susan Werner's May I Suggest. And I start this as an introduction to the Torah reading, Torah portion Bo, because the Torah portion is all about the plagues of darkness. It begins with the plagues of darkness. And the ultimate darkness, of course, is death. We meet Hamalach Hamavet, the angel of death, in this portion. There are three forms of darkness in Parashat Bo. The first is the darkness of the locust plague. And locusts are grasshoppers that have their own starvation going on, and so they become a traveling horde. These tiny, innocuous grasshoppers become a horde. And by the time we get here to this is the 8th plague, there have already been 7 plagues, the last of which was hail, and the hail destroyed part of the crop for the year, and the locusts will destroy the rest. So I'm going to share for you some readings that I've prepared. I'll just share the screen. Starting with Parashat Bo. There's an introduction by Everett Fox. Anticipating Pharaoh's eventual capitulation, the Egyptians now urge their kings to release the Israelites before Egypt is truly lost. However, and I believe that the plague of the locusts, of the tiny ones who will then travel together, is actually a foreshadowing of the Exodus itself. This longest plague is in many ways the most devastating of all, affecting, as it does so, the very soil itself. And it does say the ground becomes dark, and it covers all the ayin, the eyes, or the wells of the earth. So now there is darkness in the earth. If the earth has eyes, and ayin means both wells and eyes, then this eye of the land is darkened. Also foreshadowed in the locust removal is the final victory at the Sea of Reeds, through the mention of that east wind, that powerful east wind. Kadima is east. Or Chaim. And so we see that the introduction, we're just going to focus on the first 2 verses of Parashat Bo. And we see for the first time God saying in the first person, "For I have hardened his heart." Pharaoh's heart begins to harden itself. Pharaoh hardens his own heart. And that's like when someone does something wrong. The first time it's really hard. Second time it's easier. And by the time you have done it a few times, you become a pro at it. But now it doesn't make any sense that Pharaoh should not listen. And so we have the 8th plague, and it begins by saying that God has hardened Pharaoh's heart. Even the most obstinate person would have broken down by now only intervention by God could have accounted. This is Or HaChaim, the wonderful commentator from Morocco. That was, I think he's 1600s. That became a foundational text for the Hasidim. God did not, of course, interfere outright with Pharaoh's free will. He performed a miracle to give Pharaoh a chance to delude himself that God's power did not extend to those two categories of grain. In fact, the word used is vayechabed. No, the achabed, because it's now his first person, and I hardened his heart. And chabed is one of the three verbs that are used in Torah to say, and we summarize it all by harden, but only one of those verbs, and that's the word used at the beginning of the from last week's parasha, when Pharaoh hardens his own heart. This one has the same root as honor, kaf bet daled. Pharaoh wants to honor his own heart and nothing else, and so God makes that possible. A little bit more from the commentators. This is Me'or Einayim. Regarding the very first word, the word that the parasha is named after, come to Pharaoh, bo leFaro, and bo does not mean go. Lech means go. Bo means come. The Me'or Einayim gives, and he's a Hasidic commentator, the Me'or Einayim says that awareness was in exile, and bo is spelled bet aleph. Bet is the first word of the Torah, in the beginning, Bereshit, bara Elohim, and bet and aleph are the beginning letters of the aleph bet in reverse order. It usually goes aleph bet, and here we say bet aleph. Come to Pharaoh, which is to say that through the bet, the aleph will be in the Torah, and the aleph represents that light, that it is a silent vowel, at least it is now, silent letter. So awareness is in exile, and awareness will leave exile. Okay. I think, and I would ask you to say what you think, that it means the difference between going and coming is if you come, you've already been there before, and you can come home. You can't really come to a place for the first time, but you can go from there. This week, I related to my own life because I came to my mother at her funeral. I accompanied my mother home to her ultimate home. The word levaya, Hebrew for funeral, means to accompany. And I came home to really take a look at what my childhood, what my mother meant for me. As I mentioned before, bo is the bet and aleph, the first two letters arranged backwards. And another question, so I always wondered why this reading begins with the 8th plague. Why not have all the plagues in one parasha and begin after the plagues? Doesn't that make sense? Well, I've talked about the number 8 before. Perhaps this. 7 is completion and represents the 7 lower sfirot, or aspects of the Holy One of Blessing. This is Kabbalah, sfirot, and we'll be discussing basics of Kabbalah in our class this week. If 7 is completion, then 8 is the extraordinary that lies just beyond natural completion. Also, the final sfirot are the ones that are out of reach for us, the upper ones, beyond understanding, mysterious, that began creation. A ray of light of Chokhmah enters into the palace of Bina, and this begins creation according to the Zohar. The 8th sphira is Bina, which means understanding. I wrote wisdom, but it's understanding. I'll have to change that. And according to Me'or Einayim, Torah was in exile. Perhaps the linking of these sphirot of God is to bring God back into the land. And first you must undo the powers that be, the cruel powers that be in Egypt, are those of death, We have a Pharaoh who deems that the firstborn sons of the Israelites should die, and replacing those with God, great kindness, truth, and compassion. And I derive these from the 13 attributes of God, Exodus 34. Okay, I introduced this already. So going back to wisdom, the beginning of wisdom, says Proverbs 9:10, is yirat Hashem, the awe or fear of God. From awe and fear are the same word. They're like opposite sides of a coin. The fear, I think, is fear of doing wrong, or of taking the consequences of your foolish, headstrong actions. The making heavy, achabed, of Pharaoh's heart is an undoing of wisdom. And if we see each of the plagues as an undoing of one sphira, we can begin with Malchut. The plague of blood is an undoing of the Malchut, which is the feminine aspect of God. The way we see blood in birth, we see the blood of the dead babies instead, etc. So each of the plagues could be an undoing of one sphira. And this one, the 8th plague, could be an undoing of Bina, of wisdom. Final question. Why does God strengthen and honor and harden the hearts of Pharaoh and his advisors, but not those who are suffering, the people of Egypt? Don't our hearts need protection and help when we are frightened? Maybe, maybe not. Instead, the Holy One inclines the heart of the people towards the slaves, compassion, and many join them in escaping Egypt. And then when the Israelites ask for reparations, for gifts, and sha'alu is sometimes, which is the Hebrew, is sometimes used for borrow or steal, but the word sha'al means to ask. When they ask them for reparations and gifts, the heart of the Egyptians that had felt such trauma with the plague, instead of being hardened, were softened enough to be generous. In other words, our fears have a purpose to make us empathetic to the pain that others are going through. And thus, the nation of Israel was started with resources. And if I can put this in the chat if you'd like to read the eulogy that I shared for my mother. So the question that I would like to ask you is, who are the tyrants in your life? And I would suggest that death is a tyrant, the one that dictates, the one who we are the most afraid of. And we see Malach HaMavet come later in Bo, the angel of death. And perhaps that is the last undoing, the Keter, the final undoing of creation, when God's self, sends out a Malach HaMavet. So if Pharaoh is decreeing death and God has a Malach HaMavet, what is the difference then? That's a good question. I don't want to ruin a good question with a pat answer. I would have had a discussion, but consider this.